I made a spinner ring with silver and Damascus steel, and I was so excited about it that I decided to film the whole process to show you how it's made from start to finish. And if you would like to take one of these home, then you can check out my new website, danreesjewelry.com. This ring really is an enigma, and the whole process for creating this spinner ring with that captive Damascus steel band really is fascinating. So if you click this video looking for some satisfying silversmithing action delivered with a soothing Welsh accent, then you're in the right place. Let's go! So the first step in creating a sterling silver Damascus steel spinner ring, which is a mouthful, was to figure out how much material to use for the inner band. So I had to start out by doing some maths, using some simple equations to figure out the right amount of silver to cut to form the inside of the ring. So there I am. Hey. The inside of the ring was made with a piece of 0.8mm thick sterling silver sheet, and so I cut that with a saw and then filed the edges so that they were nice and flat, ready to solder. And then I got to enjoy this part of the process, which, I'll be honest, I don't think is safe for work. Please don't report this video. Literally never gets old, and this was the highlight of my day, peeling the plastic off bits of silver. It's the simple pleasures in life that keep me going, you know. There you go, mate. You can't say you haven't had your money's worth. But anyway, after I cut the piece of silver, it was time to use my enormous crushing strength to bend that piece of metal so that the edges were nearly touching. At that stage, it formed a kind of Millennium Falcon sort of U shape, and so I used a rawhide hammer to hammer the edges down into a D shape so that they were meeting up flat with each other, ready to solder. To prepare for the first round of soldering, I mixed up some flux in this borax dish and borax cone. Really simple. You just add water, mix the cone around, and flux magically appears. I then applied a generous amount of that flux to the seam of the ring and put it down on a soldering block. So the first step was to caramelize the goop. Something I never thought I'd say on video. But I took a blowtorch and just heated the ring up until that flux kind of turned into a caramel. And then I took my trusty snippers and cut a few pieces of hard silver solder. Did I say that right? Hard silver solder. Put those down on the soldering block and then place the seam of the ring above the pieces of solder. I fired up the blowtorch and heated the piece evenly until the silver solder was ready to flow into the seam through a capillary action. Very satisfying to watch. I've played it here in real time so you can see how suddenly that silver solder flows. It really is quite magical to watch. And there we go. And so with that joint successfully soldered, I gave the piece a satisfying dunk. After soldering, the piece was kind of all oxidized and there were big clumps of caramelized flux all over the place. And so to clean that off, I used a mild acid solution called pickle, which you just put in warm water and leave the piece in the pickle for, I don't know, 20 minutes, and it comes out as nice and clean. After pickling, it was time to kind of clean up some of the lumps of solder from the inside of the ring, which I did with a handy sanding attachment on my rotary tool. And then it was time to turn this D-shaped piece of metal into something that looked more ring-shaped. So to do that, I used a trivet or a metal mandrel, and again, using my enormous strength, I pushed the ring around the mandrel and then used my rawhide hammer to hammer it out until it was, well, round. I must say it was looking significantly more ring-shaped at this stage, but I needed to do a bit of cleanup, so I took a couple of files and a ring clamp and just filed the outside until it was nice and smooth and there were no lumps of solder left on the outside. Pretty cool little tool. And then it was time to make sure the ring was the right size. So to do that, I used the ring stretcher and just gradually expanded the ring until it was the right size. I have no idea why I thought this would be a cool shot, but there we go, I included it. So with that inner sleeve created, it was time to create some collars or rails, which I made using a 1.5mm square wire, and I was able to take the measurement of the outer diameter of the sleeve I just made to determine how much 1.5mm wire I needed to make the collars. And again, it was a similar process. I just snipped the wire off with my wire cutters, filed the edges, bent them into a D shape, and then soldered them with hard solder. Chucked them in the pickle, cleaned up the inside and outside. I once again made use of the trivet and the rawhide hammer to hammer the rings out until they were round. And after I'd done that, they were kind of a bit wonky, a bit drunk. So I just used an anvil and the rawhide hammer to whack them out until they were flat, basically. Then I gradually expanded the rings on the ring stretcher to make sure they were a perfect fit for the sleeve. So with all the silver gubbins fabricated, it was time to machine a piece of Damascus steel to form the spinner portion of the ring. So the first stage of this was to create a hole in the piece of Damascus round bar. So I had the round bar held in the chuck of my metal lathe and then used progressively larger HSS drill bits to gradually drill a hole out of that piece of steel. And then I needed to just take out a small amount of material from the inside just so that the spinner had enough room to actually spin. And so I used my boring out tool just to take off about 0.5 millimeter. And I do love this boring out tool. Nice carbide cutting tip that just cuts through stainless steel like butter. It's beautiful. I then machined the outer diameter using another carbide cutting tool. And when the right diameter was achieved, I then parted the piece off with a parting off tool. Which was a fairly loud operation, so I think I've done my best to keep the volume down on this part. After parting the ring off, I used the Unimandrel from ringsupplies.com to hold the ring, and then used a few grits of wet and dry sandpaper from like 240 up to 1200 grit, just to give the ring a nice surface finish and make sure there were no machining marks left on it. And then I whipped over the ring with some Tripoli polishing compound on a nylon brush, which gave me a pretty nice finish. I thoroughly cleaned the piece and then dunked it into an acid solution. For this I used ferric chloride, which etches the steel to bring out that gorgeous pattern. So while the Damascus was in the acid solution, it was time to solder on those rails. And as you can see, I did a cracking job of caramelizing that goo again. And this time, to solder the rails onto the main sleeve, I used small pieces of easy silver solder. Basically, the easy solder melts at a lower temperature than the hard solder. And so I was able to use this without kind of melting the previous seams of the 3 rings I fabricated earlier. I think soldering is a very mindful process. You know, you're not worrying about paying your bills when you're wielding a blowtorch. And I think I did a pretty good job on that first one. After the first rail was soldered, I slotted all the pieces together. So the Damascus spinner and the second rail, caramelized that goopy flux, and then applied a few pieces of silver solder and proceeded to solder the whole piece together. Now this was a pretty delicate operation because I needed to make sure that the solder didn't kind of flow down onto that piece of steel and, you know, weld it into place. It needed a bit of play so that the spinner could actually spin. So, I mean, this was, again, pretty nerve-wracking, pretty mindful, but I think I did a pretty good job. So after all of the pieces were fabricated and all of the bits were soldered together, the ring went back to the pickling solution to clean off the oxidization and the leftover flux. And then it was time for the cleanup operation. So I did this using files, my rotary tool, bits of emery paper, just to ensure that the edges were nice and smooth. There was a nice taper on the inside of the ring for comfort, and that's, you know, there was a nice finish on the ring without any like big tooling marks or anything. And then I decided to use a Scotch-Brite wheel to give the silver portion of the ring a lovely brushed finish. So these Scotch-Brite wheels, I don't know, I just love the kind of sateen finish that they leave. So I went over the whole piece with the Scotch-Brite, and then for the actual Damascus spinner piece of the ring, I used a green polishing compound on a cotton buffing reel. I just went over the whole piece of Damascus until it was nice and shiny and smooth and pretty, and that finish was a nice contrast to the brushed silver. After all the buffing and polishing, I cleaned the piece thoroughly with soap and water, and I must say I am very, very happy with the result. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you'd like to take a spinner ring like this home, then I do have them available on my website, danreesjewelry.com. In the meantime, I'd love it if you subscribed, show the channel some support, and I will see you in the next one. Safe!